From Buffalo Wild Wings in Grand Forks, welcome to Benchwarmers. Today's featured guests are radio play-by-play voice for UND men's basketball, Paul Ralston. Sports reporter for the Grand Forks Herald, Tom Miller. Sports director at WDAZ TV, Phil Neumann. And our host, Midco Sports Network's Greg Enkers.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Benchwarmers. We are on location at Buffalo Wild Wings in Grand Forks, North Dakota this week. Tom Neumann has the week off. We've gone deep onto the bench for a host this week, but we've got another all-star cast for our panel this week, and we're going to start close to home. We're in Grand Forks, North Dakota, home to the University of North Dakota, and the saga in the nickname controversy has taken a couple different turns last week. To get you up to speed, the university committee narrowed it down from 7 nickname possibilities down to 5, and in amongst the controversy there, they pulled the moving forward with just North Dakota or UND and not going with a nickname. And I guess, Tom, I'll start with you. And first off, what was it right or was it okay for the committee to pull that option from the public as they get closer to a public vote here?
Well, I think that's a pretty polarizing question. You know, I think there's a lot of people, myself included, that think pulling North Dakota was the right move the committee had to make, even though it wasn't popular. There are a lot of people out there who maybe believe a little more in the democratic process of the whole thing and believe if that's the majority, then that should be what the people get an opportunity to say. UND President Robert Kelly ended up saying he's going to consider it again. I would imagine it gets back on the list to some sort of public vote, but like Brad Schlossman always says, and I think the last time we were on this show, he said, every time you think you figured out this nickname thing, something takes a twist that you just didn't see coming.
What do you guys think could ultimately end up happening? I mean, is this going to come back as an option, and if so, where does that leave things?
Well, you understand why, from a marketing standpoint, from a branding aspect, they don't want to have no nickname. They want to have a nickname, I should say. But I think most people with the Fighting Sioux nickname, they thought that represented the university the best, and they don't want another nickname. They'd rather have no nickname than put another one on it, just from the pride aspect.
Quite frankly, having been around it my whole life, this whole process has been exhausting. But the reality of it is that as a broadcaster doing UND basketball games, it's nice to have a little bit of a crutch to have a nickname. So from a selfish standpoint, it would be nice to have a nickname because it does make broadcasts easier. I understand, this has been a real divisive issue in a lot of ways. First of all, I think that's tough. You talk about the committee. Were they right or wrong to remove UND North Dakota from the option, from the list? And to be honest with you, there are a lot of good people. I feel like they're kind of caught in a tough situation. There was some former athlete that made a comment on Twitter, and I'm not even on Twitter, but it was passed along, like, who is Little Schweigert? Well, Little Schweigert was a former UND athlete and a very good one at the University of North Dakota, and then he was a booster president, and he's just been every step of the way. So for him to be in there, I mean, a lot of these committee members are, their heart is at the University of North Dakota. So for really to try to take away credibility of who these people are being on the committee, I felt really bad, because you look even at the student athletes like Chelsea Mosier or Dio Idowu, they're both president and going to be president of the Student Athletic Academic Committee, basically, and so they're really highly and well regarded from their classmates and teammates. So I felt bad that maybe they were getting a little vitriol from a lot of different areas for their decision, but I wasn't going to be on that committee, and so you have to tip your cap to them for doing the best that they can. Where does it go from here? Boy, just when you think you have it figured out, I don't know necessarily that you do. So we'll see.
Well, we are down to a final 5 as it stands right now, with maybe a 6th option if North Dakota /UND comes back into the fold. The 5 finalists right now, as the committee has chosen, are the Fighting Hawks, the Nodaks, the Sun Dogs, the Rough Riders, and the North Stars. You guys had your final say in that. Which of those 5? We'll leave things where they are right now with North Dakota UND off the table. Which of those 5 would you go with?
I'll start and I'll say Rough Riders. I don't know if it's got enough steam behind it anymore. I think the public relations aspect of that took a little hit here recently when they've come out and talked about some of the things maybe Teddy Roosevelt said about Native Americans during his lifetime, and I think that's gonna be into consideration when people start voting on this thing. Whether or not that would put North Dakota back down the same rabbit hole they're in right now. But that's a nickname that I think people would get behind. I think North Stars is just too Minnesotan for a lot of people, but who knows?
Well, and to your point, Tom, about Rough Riders, they talk about other schools. Indiana's the Hoosier State. And one of the nicknames that North Dakota is officially or unofficially known has been the Rough Rider State. So I'm going to abstain because as an employee and a member of the UND Athletics Department, I don't think it's my place to say I have a favorite. I do probably personally have one in there that I tend to like a little bit. Actually, two that I thought were on the original list never made it. So I guess I can be all humbug and angry about none of my choices making it originally. But, I think there's a couple of choices in there that might work. I have a favorite, but I'll abstain from this point just of naming one at this point in time.
Well, I think some of the issue that some people have with Rough Riders is that it's the name of one of the local high schools in town, Grand Forks Red River Rough Riders. I don't know how big of a deal that is to some people. They don't want to replicate that. But just in terms of looking at the whole, you got to pick something that people are going to be okay with. You're not going to make everybody happy, right? That's never going to happen. So you need something, and we were talking about it before the show, actually. Paul used the reference, just rip the Band-Aid off, choose something and be done with it. Now you want it to be thorough and well thought out, but let's just hope they get something sooner rather than later.
It's really easy to pick the negatives out of each of these nicknames, especially when people were so tied to that Fighting Sioux nickname that was here. You mentioned Rough Riders is the name of a nickname of a local high school here. North Stars kind of goes back to Minnesota. Sundogs, I think there's a lot of people that are confused as to what Sundogs even are. So what do you do there for a mascot? Nodax, I think there it's I've never heard anybody from North Dakota refer to them as a Nodak, so that might be kind of almost forcing something into play. And then Fighting Hawks kind of feels a little bit generic.
I will say that Nodaks, there's actually old UND men's basketball uniforms that had Nodaks on them back in the 50s or 60s, somewhere in there. So it's not, it has been on uniforms before, but you're right, and you talk about how the public will vote, and my hope is that stakeholders like alumni will get maybe more weight to them, or UND students would get more weight to their opinions and things of that nature. Student athletes maybe would get more weight to them. I don't know necessarily that the method has been discussed much yet, but how they're going to go about it, that would be my hope, because they're the people that are going to be the friends of the university moving forward. They're going to be the ones representing the university moving forward, and they're going to have the most to gain or from this whole process. So I hope that their voices are heard most, I guess, when we move forward, however it happens.
Well, we'll stay tuned to this topic, as I'm sure it'll take at least a couple more turns between now and when it's officially finalized. And the sports seasons at UND are going to be kicking off here again in the coming weeks, and there's some big changes coming to Big Sky Sports. We'll talk about that next here on Benchwarmers.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers, Grand Forks, North Dakota, our location this week, and the football season's going to be kicking off here in a matter of weeks. And at the Big Sky Media Days, there was an announcement from the league that they're going to be implementing video replay in all football and basketball games. And Phil, I guess I'll start with you here. How do you see this as impacting the games that UND will be playing in this season?
Well, first of all, I think it's great. I mean, it's the evolution of the game. You look at FCS football, only 2 other conferences before this have implemented it full time. Other conferences have experimented with instant replay, but now the Big Sky becomes the 3rd FCS conference. So kind of putting them in the front of just kind of in terms of technology and using it, I think it's great. I think it'll impact it. It'll help make the right calls be made, and I think that's what everybody wants in the end. Sure, sometimes, people argue it could mess with the flow of the game, both in football and basketball, but I think at the end of the day, what everybody wants is to get the call right, and I think this will help with that.
Coaches will be allowed one challenge that they can use. If they get it right, they get a bonus challenge, as I understand it. And there's discussion when it has to come from the head coach that, does that take away from where his focus needs to be? Do you see that being problematic for any of the coaches?
You bring up an interesting point here about the get the bonus challenge. It's like a game show. You get one right, you get another. But to be honest with you, I honestly feel like in today's coaching world, there's so many assistants and coordinators, and the coach is that administrator. I think he can manage this well. And I think one of the only thing that I thought coming out of the meetings when they first introduced this, and maybe Tom can talk to a little bit about it as well, was we're not going to be doing something like if it's the score's out of hand and if it's a non-meaningful situation, well, that can be kind of broad, I guess, as kind of one of the, what constitutes the right situation, basically, is one of the things that when I took out of that. So I think there'll be some trial and error and trial by fire, but I guess I'm actually a bit in favor of it. And on the athletic side for the University of North Dakota, I've talked to a lot of people involved in it already. We're actually already ready for this process. Other schools may have some issues or have an investment to do or just have some things to figure out in order to do it, but UND is already in and ready for this to go forward, so it's not like we're scrambling basically going into the season.
I think there's a couple different things. When you bring up the point about how head coaches will handle this, I think that's what they really try to stress at these meetings, is that the replay booth will have 4 angles at one time the entire game, and they want a lot of the replay initiated from the booth. I think they want to take that decision out of the coach's hands. Obviously, there will be times where the coach will feel maybe that he needs to challenge a play. Speaking to Paul's point about some of the ambiguity of, is this a meaningful play? Well, is 3 scores in the first half. When you're talking in the Big Sky, when teams can put up 21, 28 points in a quarter, who says it's a meaningful play?
That's exactly right.
And if there's certain areas of college football that look at point differential, then every play is a meaningful play. And I think there's going to be a lot to muck through when it comes to that, and there's going to be a lot of maybe discussions and complaints at the administrative level, maybe some things we don't notice quite all the time at game time.
Is there any moment you guys can think back to from last season? I know it's a number of years ago now. I can recall when UND was playing at Northern Colorado on the last play of the game, and Northern Colorado had 12 men on the field. Is there anything that sticks out, though, maybe from last year where you feel like this could have changed an outcome possibly?
Nothing comes to mind for me. Obviously, the 12 players on the field is one a lot of people talk about. I think there was basketball speaking, I think there was a play at the Big Sky Championship that when they replayed something, their equipment played it back at half speed. So when the officials went to clock what the clock should be at, they were off because the replay was at half speed. I think a big thing there is that they're going through a third party now. You're not leaving it up to each individual school, which I think is important when you play in such a huge league, and resources are different across the league. So I think it's good that they're having a third party do this, and technology will be the same no matter where you are.
Yeah, you touched on the play that is at least first and foremost in the mind of UND football fans. Last year, there could have been a couple plays here or there, but nothing that just shouts at me. But you never know, and I think that at least this gives you an opportunity to challenge it and at least make it a point. And you still may not get the call, may not turn out your way. What you see on the field may not actually show up what's being played in the replay booth. But I'm excited for it. The only thing sometimes you worry about is slowing down the game. That is a legitimate concern for me because that does happen from time to time, whatever the sport, basketball or football. But I think getting the call right, as Phil alluded to, is just the imperative thing here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, the second home for UND football is nearing its completion, the High Performance Center. They're nearing the final phases of Phase 1, I guess I should say. The turf is down, the goalposts are up, the lighting's in, everything except for the track. And I guess the question I have there is where, with this new practice facility that at least for the time is going to be one of, if not the largest by square footage in the country, where does that put it when you factor in all the other facilities that UND has to offer? Where does that put them in the Big Sky?
Well, I haven't been to every school in the Big Sky, but I mean, you have to think it elevates them towards the top just because it's a state-of-the-art facility. It's going to have all these different features, and that only helps with recruiting, not to mention, not from a football aspect, from a track and field aspect. The track is going to be a 300-meter track, which is fairly rare in North America. Speaking with Brian Faison, they said there's only a couple of these in the country and in the continent altogether. So that's going to be a draw for indoor track and field championships of all levels, to have a 300-meter rather than a 200-meter track. So I think it only elevates the University of North Dakota athletic program.
And it's not only just within the Big Sky, I think it's in the region, because you're always recruiting against all the schools, even if they're not in the same conference. You're going after a lot of the same student athletes, whether it be football, track and field, whatever it is. It's a game changer that way for all the sports of football, track and field, and anything that you can get inside that building, which are a variety of sports. It really helps in that sense. But in the Big Sky alone, I've been to Montana and seen Washington Grizz, and that's a great venue for football, but they don't have a facility like this for a bit, just their training purposes, and so this changes, I guess, the field position, to use a football term, for the University of North Dakota. If we're going to compete against the Montanas, the Montana States, the Eastern Washingtons, we have to have kind of some bells and whistles, because at least in the conference-wise, in the history and the track record, they've got all that, because historically they've been the schools. Well, maybe we get a few more looks because we're investing in being better here as a program and as an athletic department, and so maybe that gets you a few more student athletes along the way.
Sure. And I just think of how much more practice production can be done. How many practices were cut short because it's freezing, or how many practices you didn't bother working on the deep pass game because you're throwing into 40-mile-an-hour winds and it doesn't do you any good. I just think you can get so much more done. They have the full field, and they have workout lineman areas beyond that. That's how big that facility is. So I just think there's so much more to get done when you can control the environment in a place like North Dakota.
One sport that will take advantage of that facility is baseball as well in the spring when they can't get outside. Jeff Campbell, former UND Slugger, went on earlier this past month and won the College Home Run Derby, blasted 20 in the first round. He's now signed with the Atlanta Braves. Quick thoughts on just what could something like that do for the baseball program? Is that just something that a nice little novelty to have, or could there actually be an impact with somebody winning something on a national stage like that?
It was on the national stage, the biggest stage in sports. I mean, ESPN on a prime time, and Jeff Campbell goes out and blasts 20 home runs in the first round. He's got everybody on social media talking. I mean, Jeff Dodson, the head coach, said afterwards, you can't buy this type of publicity. And sure, they were happy for Campbell, and it resulted in him getting a pro deal. But for the University of North Dakota baseball program, Jeff Dodson was saying, it shows that you can come to a place like UND and still accomplish all your goals in baseball. That's just what Jeff Campbell did coming from Clearwater, Florida.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's a perfect example. We have a player that came from Florida to play baseball at North Dakota. Now they went on the broadcast and they said some of the reasons that he went, but it just goes to show you that, players can come from the South, and now with the High Performance Center, it's just another reason that they're not necessarily always going to have to be out in the elements, since it gives them another opportunity to be inside on the worst of days, which we do have from time to time out here.
Well, and you can say three guys got deals out of that team. Tyler Falla signed with the Rockies, Andrew Tomei signed with the Astros. So it wasn't just kind of a one-hit wonder. Three guys in the same class. That's good for that program.
And here we are, coming to the end of summer, some would say, as NFL training camps are opening up. We're going to talk Minnesota Vikings and more when we come back on Benchwarmers.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Well, welcome back to Benchwarmers in Grand Forks, North Dakota. As we approach the end of July, it means that it's time to start talking football, of course, as NFL training camps are beginning to open up. The Vikings started their training camp this past weekend in Mankato, and as they look from year one to year two in the Mike Zimmer era as head coach, they're also going from year one to year two in the Teddy Bridgewater era at quarterback. And what strides do you feel like he needs to make from year one to year two to make the team around him better?
I think some decision making could improve. You know, he's already a guy who's known for staying in the pocket, even though he has some athletic skills. I think I almost called him UND. I think the Vikings improve some of the talent around him. You know, have some more weaponry to choose from. But I think it's kind of exciting for Minnesota fans to have a young quarterback to kind of get behind and learn. You know, it's probably been maybe Dante Culpepper since, you know, people have been able to get excited about a young quarterback who's building. You know, over the years, watched a lot of kind of aging quarterbacks for the Vikings, whether it was Favre or Warren Moon or Randall Cunningham. You know, I think it's energized the fan base to have a talented young guy.
Well, he's a guy who, if it weren't for Odell Beckham Jr. and the incredible year he had last year, probably would have won Rookie of the Year. So you hear about the sophomore slump and things like that, but I really think just hearing from him throughout OTAs and in mini camps, he's taking on a bigger leadership role, which is, you know, impressive for a second-year guy. And you bring in a Mike Wallace, a deep threat for the Vikings that he can have, and you bring back Adrian Peterson, obviously, with that running game, things that are only going to help him progress as a quarterback. And you have to think, you know, there's pretty high expectations for this Vikings team, as you alluded to, Tom, probably higher than there have been in quite a few years.
Absolutely. You know, I think Adrian Peterson coming back, you know, makes it a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an obvious point, but I think, you know, I feel like Minnesota more than anywhere had quite the drop off between, you know, A and B, and I think everybody's curious to see if he looks like the Adrian Peterson of old.
And I'll give you one stat on that. Is the last time he missed a season. Now, it's for a different reason, but he's proved that he can bounce back. And the last time he missed a season due to knee surgery, he came back, rushed for over 2,000 yards. So maybe the rest helps him. I know he's 30 years old, but we'll see.
30's not old.
Yeah, that's 30 years young.
Not for him, not for all day. Well, we're going to talk about the Vikings again coming up a little bit later in the show. But coming up next, it's time to hear from the lunch crowd here at Buffalo Wild Wings as we go into the crowd for our Winging It question. That's next here on Benchwarmers.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers, Grand Forks, North Dakota. Time now for our Winging It segment where we go out to the lunch crowd for our question of the week. Here's Austin Bramley.
Hey, thanks, Greg. I'm here with Zane, who's from right here in Grand Forks, and he has a question on UND hockey.
Do you think the hockey program will be different in Grand Forks with Coach Bradbury?
All right, thanks, Zane. Greg, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Zane. Guys, what do we think? What's going to be different about the UND hockey team this year with the new leader at the helm?
I honestly don't think there's going to be much of a change on day-to-day and how they operate and what they do. I think it's going to be a different team, however. I think that's going to be the biggest change is because they're going to have some young players they're going to have to develop quickly, and they're going to have to be looked at as the scorers because they don't have some of the veteran players that they had that did the scoring for this team here in the last year. Now, they do have some nice veteran blue liners that they can rely on, and I think that's going to be real nice for Coach Barry and his staff to continue to kind of have as anchors back there on the blue line and kind of run the team. But I think really his biggest change and thing that he's going to have to deal with is basically facilitating a lot of youth maybe to take over some roles a little bit earlier, and it may be a little bit bumpy in the early going, but it's just going to be some growing. It's one of those years basically. I think that's where the biggest difference, at least this year, you're going to see with this coaching staff at the helm.
Yeah, and most of the players have said that to this point, that not much has changed from their day-to-day routine or anything like that, because both Bradbury and associate head coach Dane Jackson, they've been in this program for years, and they're not going to, if it's not broke, don't fix it, that kind of thing. But he'll have a different style, I'm sure, than Coach Haxtell, but in terms of the overall, not much will change, I don't think.
I think it'll be much of the same as well. These guys are a big reason why these guys are even on campus, because they were such a big part of the recruiting factor, so that'll definitely play into Bradbury's advantages there. When we come back, we're going to take a look at our poll question of the week. We'll dive back into the NFL. That's next on Benchwarmers.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Checking in on our poll question of the week, what would constitute a successful season for the Vikings? We polled our lunchtime crowd here at Buffalo Wild Wings, and the vast majority say making the playoffs at 65%, making the Super Bowl 18% coming in second. Everybody always optimistic here in July. I've got them at 9-7, just missing the playoffs. Thanks to our panelists for being with us this week. That's going to do it for Benchwarmers. We'll see you next time.